The mother, who's a flamboyant California biker with an affinity for who bravely raises her little son, Rocky, a little boy with a rare disease that eventually distorts his face into a cruel mask of deformity.
Okay, so you probably think you know the story. A disfigured boy, a wild biker mom, a tear-jerking Hollywood movie, Cher and Leather, the whole package. But what if the most famous inspirational movie of the 80s only told half the story? What if I told you that the real Rusty Dennis, Rocky's infamous mom, sat down before her death and said things about her son, her life, and that movie that absolutely nobody was ready to hear? Today, we're talking about Roy Lee Rocky Dennis, his mother Rusty, and what she revealed about the truth behind the legend. Who was Rocky Dennis, the real story? Let's start at the beginning, before the movie, before Cher, before any of it. Because to understand what Rusty said, you first need to understand what this family was actually living. Roy Lee Dennis, nicknamed Rocky because as a baby he wouldn't sleep unless someone rocked him, was born on December 4th, 1961, in Glendora, to Florence Rusty Tullis and his second husband, Roy Dennis. As a very young child, Rocky had frequent ear and sinus infections. Nothing catastrophic, just a sickly kid. Then, when he was about 2 years old, he went in for a tonsillectomy, and that's when everything changed. The X-ray technologist noticed something wrong with the boy's skull. What followed was nearly a full year of visits to UCLA Medical Center, multiple times a week, until the diagnosis finally came down: craniodiaphyseal dysplasia. 2 words that changed everything. This is a disease so rare that in 1965, when Rusty was first told about it, doctors said only 6 other cases had ever been recorded in all of medical history. 6. In the entire world. The condition causes abnormal calcium deposits to accumulate in the skull. Bones thicken, grow, push outward, distorting the face, compressing the brain, destroying vision and hearing and neurological function, slowly and relentlessly. Doctors told Rusty the prognosis flat out. Her son would be blind, likely intellectually disabled, and dead before he turned 7 years old. Dead at 7. But here's the thing about Rusty Dennis. She didn't fold. She didn't retreat into grief. She looked at those doctors and essentially told them she'd see about that. And the story of how she raised Rocky, and what she said about it before she died, is the story we're actually here to tell. Here's where Rusty really showed what kind of mother she was. She refused to let institutions write her son off. While living in Covina and Glendora, she pushed schools and doctors to treat Rocky like any other kid. Doctors claimed his eyesight was too poor for reading. She dismissed that. Schools tried to move him out of mainstream classes. She fought back. She later told people she believed the resistance wasn't about Rocky's intelligence, which she insisted was intact, but about other parents' discomfort. And Rocky proved her right. His warmth and humor struck screenwriter Anna Hamilton Phelan during a visit to UCLA's Center for Genetic Research. Phelan later said Rusty wasn't conventional, but she was exactly the mother Rocky needed. But before we get to what Rusty revealed, you have to ask yourself, who exactly was this woman? Because the version Cher played on screen, that was the polished version. The real Rusty, she was something else entirely. The woman behind the leather jacket. Let me paint you a portrait of Florence Rusty Tullis, née Steinberg, because the real woman was far more complicated and far more fascinating than anything a Hollywood script could fully contain. Rusty was born in Brooklyn on May 29, 1936. Her father was a truck driver. She was Jewish, Brooklyn-raised, sharp-tongued from birth. At 13, she was kicked out of junior high school for truancy. At 14, she was smoking marijuana and running with motorcycle gangs. At 15, she dropped out of school entirely and took a job as a hoochie-coochie dancer at Coney Island. She was not old enough to have a learner's permit for a car. At 17, she married her first husband, truck driver Tommy Mason. A year or 2 later, their son Joshua was born. That marriage fell apart, and Rusty moved back in with her parents. Then came her second marriage, to Roy Dennis, and a move to California. And in 1961, Rocky was born. By the time Rocky was diagnosed, Rusty had already built her entire personal philosophy around a single idea: that you can make yourself well if you believe hard enough. She told interviewers that she had decided early in her life that if a person could make themselves sick, they could also make themselves well. She raised Rocky on that conviction. Every time he had a headache, every time the pain flared, she would send him to his room and tell him to make himself well. Was that empowering? Rocky's spirit certainly suggests it was. But it was also, as we'll get to, a philosophy that carried a shadow. Now here's something the film smartly showed but still softened. Rusty was a full member of the Turks, a motorcycle gang. These weren't cosplay bikers. These were rough, hard-living people who built a world around loyalty and blunt love. And they adored Rocky. The film's character Gar, played by Sam Elliott, is based on a real man named Bernie Tullis, Rusty's partner. The entire biker circle that surrounded Rocky wasn't set dressing. They were his family. And Rusty's drug use. She was direct about it in a way the movie never quite captured. In interviews, she pushed back on the film's framing. The movie suggested she used because she was struggling, because she was overwhelmed and drowning. Rusty didn't accept that framing. She said she partied all the time and drugs were part of the partying lifestyle. That's not a woman in pain reaching for a crutch. That's a woman who partied hard and owned it. That distinction mattered enormously to her. So what does a woman like this, biker, drug user, school dropout, fiercely unconventional mother, actually say when the cameras come calling after her son dies? Because what Rusty said about the film, about Rocky, and about the night he died, that is where the bad really starts. The movie, the money, and what Rusty actually said. By 1985, Mask was in theaters across America. Directed by Peter Bogdanovich. Starring Cher as Rusty and Eric Stoltz as Rocky. It grossed over $48,230,000 at the box office. And Rusty Dennis had been paid $15,000 for the film rights. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. $48 million at the box office. $15,000 to the woman whose life, and whose dead son's life, made it all possible. But here's what makes that $15,000 even more complicated. According to the Mask Wikipedia entry and multiple interviews, most of that money went directly to pay medical bills for her oldest son Joshua, who was at that time undergoing treatment for AIDS. Rusty didn't sell Rocky's story for profit. She sold it to keep another son alive. When the movie came out, reporters descended on Rusty expecting gratitude. Maybe some tears, maybe some gracious Hollywood praise. What they got instead was something far more interesting. She called the film a fairy tale. Not a tribute or beautiful memorial to her son. A fairy tale. Those were her words. She said, "I always thought showing Rocky's courage would help a lot of disabled kids, and the parents of disabled kids. Sometimes they are more disabled than their kids. I didn't realize the movie would be about me, too. Thanks to Cher's brilliance, I come off a kind of heroine." Read that carefully. She wasn't bitter about Cher's performance. She actually praised it. What she couldn't fully square was a shift in focus. She had imagined a film about Rocky's extraordinary courage. What she got was a film that split the spotlight, turning her into a central character, a complicated, glamorous anti-heroine, when she had only ever thought of herself as his mother. On Cher specifically, Rusty was actually generous. She said, "Cher depicted the way I am very well. I always thought I was perfectly normal, that the rest of the world is nuts." That line, "the rest of the world is nuts," is as good a distillation of who Rusty Dennis was as anything else on record. And the Chicago Tribune also confirmed the two biggest factual departures from reality that Rusty pointed out. First, the film compressed a decade-plus of events into what looks like about a year. Second, and this is the one that clearly stung, her oldest son Joshua doesn't appear in the film at all. He was simply written out of Rocky's story. Then there was the music. Rocky Dennis loved Bruce Springsteen. He was a devoted fan. Director Peter Bogdanovich built the entire original soundtrack around Springsteen's songs. But Universal Pictures couldn't reach a deal with Columbia Records and quietly swapped the music for Bob Seger tracks without telling Bogdanovich. Rusty was not pleased. In a 1985 appearance on the San Francisco talk show People Are Talking, she said flatly, "I don't think Rocky even knew who Bob Seger was." That's a precise, devastating quote. And it was all she needed to say. Bogdanovic was so enraged he sued Universal for $19 million, claiming the music was swapped in violation of his final cut privilege. The Springsteen songs were eventually restored for the 2004 director's cut DVD, 20 years after Rocky's story first reached theaters. But here's what really nobody talks about. Because all of that, the money, the music, the fairy tale, that's complicated. What Rusty said about the night Rocky actually died, that hits different entirely. The night Rocky died, and the truth in it. By September 1978, Rocky's health had declined sharply. He was 16 years old, and the disease that should have killed him before age 7 had finally begun to win. He was in a wheelchair in the final weeks. The headaches that had been his constant companion his entire life had escalated to a level that nothing could touch. On October 3rd, September 1978, the family, Rocky, Rusty, and the biker circle around them, went out to a restaurant for dinner. Everyone could see how weak he had become. That evening, Rocky came home with a headache. Rusty did what she had always done throughout his entire life. She sent him to his room and told him to make himself well. He never woke up. Rocky Dennis died the following morning, October 3rd, September 1978, at home, in his sleep. He was 16 years old, nearly 17. He had outlived his death sentence by nearly a decade. Now, the movie shows Rusty discovering his body herself, a raw and devastating scene. In reality, at the time of Rocky's death, Rusty was not at home. She was at her lawyer's office dealing with a drug possession charge. Her partner Bernie, the real-life guy, called to tell her. That gap between movie and reality matters not because it makes Rusty a bad mother, but because it reveals how much Hollywood smoothed the edges of an already jagged story. And there's something Rusty said about her parenting philosophy, the make-yourself-well approach she had applied to Rocky from infancy, that deserves to be examined without editorial spin. She never publicly described it as a failure or framed it as guilt. That characterization would be putting words in her mouth. What she did say, plainly and repeatedly, was that she believed in it completely. Whether that philosophy also meant Rocky's pain was sometimes minimized, that is something only Rocky and Rusty knew. What the record confirms is that she never backed away from it, never apologized for it, and believed to the end that it had given Rocky something invaluable, the refusal to see himself as dying. But to fully understand Rusty Dennis, you have to understand Joshua. Because the brother the movie erased is the key to understanding almost everything else, including why she sold Rocky's story in the first place. Joshua, the son Hollywood left out. Joshua Mason was Rusty's first son, and Hollywood erased him from Mosque. That omission reportedly bothered her. In 1985, Joshua was a writer in San Francisco. A year later, he was diagnosed with Kaposi's sarcoma, the cancer widely associated with AIDS during the mid-1980s crisis. He was openly gay and described his mother as supportive, though she hoped for grandchildren and once suggested a sperm bank. Joshua died in 1987 at 32. Rusty had now lost both sons. According to Mask records, most of the film rights money she received went toward Joshua's medical bills. She sold one son's story to try to save the other. In a Chicago Tribune interview, she once said, "Joshua doesn't believe in dying, and neither do I." And so by the time it was Rusty's turn to face the end, what did she leave behind? What did this defiant, complicated, impossible woman say when the clock was running out? Rusty's final chapter. After Rocky died, Rusty moved to San Francisco and took up Buddhism. She worked as a counselor helping drug addicts. She had plans, at the time of the film's release, to work at the Shanti Project, a workshop for the terminally ill, including AIDS patients. The woman who had once been defined entirely by chaos was, by 1985, building something quieter. She still rode motorcycles. On October 14, 2006, Rusty, then going by Florence, was riding her three-wheel motorcycle when the right tire fell off. She lost control. The bike struck a curb. Her body slammed into a telephone pole. What makes the aftermath harrowing is that no one knew. Friends and family had no idea until a brief item in the San Gabriel Valley Tribune mentioned an unidentified 70-year-old woman injured in a motorcycle accident. They connected the dots and went to her. She had broken both legs and suffered a punctured lung. She survived the initial accident. She was Rusty Dennis. Of course she did. But the resulting infection was the thing that could not be fought off. Florence Rusty Tullis died on November 11, 2006, at Beverly Hospital in Montebello. She was 70 years old. Before she died, she never stopped being exactly who she had always been. She said Rocky's death was just another place to go, and he loved going places. And she said that death was something she and Joshua simply did not believe in. She never asked why me. Not once. Not for Rocky. Not for Joshua. Not for herself. The Chicago Tribune profile described her, in 1986, as a 49-year-old Jewish mother, former drug addict, go-go girl, and Shockley products distributor, living in a good housekeeping neat biker crash pad in San Francisco's ethnic Mission District with one nephew and three bikers named Pelican, Lenny, and Steve. That description is one of the great character portraits in American journalism, because it's absurd and it's real and it somehow explains everything. And so, with all of that on the table, all the mess, the truth, the gaps between the movie and reality, what does it actually mean? The legacy, and what it all really means. Here's what the verified record shows us when we strip away the Hollywood gloss. Rocky Dennis lived 16 years, nearly 17, with a disease that should have taken him before he could read. He did it with wit, warmth, and a complete refusal to define himself by how he looked. He graduated Sandberg Junior High as an honor student after starting academically behind. He was elected best buddy, most good-natured, and friendliest camper. He tutored classmates for $3 an hour and negotiated the rate himself. He memoized the night sky. He fell in love at summer camp with a blind girl who could not see his face and saw everything else. He asked his doctor, when offered surgery to correct his features, "Who will I see in the mirror if I change my face?" He chose his face. His mother, meanwhile, was a Brooklyn-born biker with a drug habit, a truancy record, and a conviction that the world was more broken than her son. And she was right. She fought school principals who tried to shunt Rocky into special education. She berated doctors who tried to box him in with timelines. She surrounded him with a family of rough, loyal people who loved him without conditions. She told him every day that he was not a victim. And yes, she told Rocky, on the last night of his life, to go to his room and make himself well.